Now let's take a look at the compressor itself. We have the same familiar bypass button and the presets menu along the top. Before we get into the rest of the controls, let's talk about the key aspects of a Dynamics processor. These key terms are attack, release, threshold, ratio, knee, and gain. So let's talk about the threshold first, since it's a pivotal piece of how a Dynamics processor works. The threshold is the decibel level at which the Dynamics processor will take effect. Many Dynamics processors have a movable threshold like the compressor in Logic does. This means that you can raise or lower the level of the threshold to suit your audio content. However, some compressors have a fixed threshold, so you'd have to raise the input level to make the audio level loud enough to cross the threshold. If the signal level is below the threshold, then the Dynamics processor won't respond to it. Only when the signal level crosses the threshold will the Dynamics processor respond. When the Dynamics processor does respond, that's when the other controls come into play. The attack is how quickly the processor takes effect once the signal crosses the threshold. A fast attack means that it will take effect very quickly, while a slow attack means the processor will act more slowly. This leads us to a mix tip. A lot of mixers take advantage of the attack time to help them shape the transients of a signal, since this can alter the feel of an instrument. For example, an instrument with a sharp transient like a snare drum or an acoustic guitar, for example, would best be preserved with a fast attack. But if you wanted to change the feel of the performance and make it feel a little lazy or behind the beat, you could use a slower attack to accomplish this. The release is much like the attack, but it controls how quickly or slowly the effect of the Dynamics processor will be released and return the signal to its normal, unaltered state. The ratio setting determines how much the processor will do once it crosses the threshold and the attack has kicked in. For example, a compressor with the ratio of 2 to 1 will lower the level of the output signal in half when it crosses the threshold. If the signal is 4 decibels louder than the threshold, the compressor will only output a signal 2 decibels louder than the threshold. Here we can see a ratio of 10 to 1 will output a signal only 1/10 of the input signal. The knee setting is how quickly the compressor will adjust to the ratio. For example, if your ratio is at 10 to 1 with a hard knee, which is a lower setting value, the signal will immediately be attenuated when it crosses the threshold. However, with a soft knee, which is a higher setting value, the ratio may start off more gently and work its way from 2 to 1 to 10 to 1. This, of course, happens over a very short period of time, but it has the audible effect of softening the attack. The gain, or the makeup gain, is used to control the overall level of the signal output from the Dynamics processor. When compressing a signal, the overall level can become quieter since you're effectively lowering it by compressing the audio that crosses the threshold. As a result, you may need to use the makeup gain to raise the overall level of the signal. This will also effectively raise the quieter sections of the signal, so any quiet elements in the signal will now sound louder to the listener. Essentially, the makeup gain function is the same as it does on the EQ. The sidechain setting allows you to key the compressor off of a specific input that is different from the signal that you're actually compressing. So, for example, let's say you're mixing an EDM track or a pop track and you want the characteristic pulsing sounding synth, like a pulse sounding synth. If you have a kick that's playing on all 4 beats, you could send that signal into the compressor's key input, which could cause the compressor to react every time the kick plays. A limiter is basically just a compressor, but with a much higher ratio. Some say that a ratio above 10 to 1 is a limiter, while others say that anything above 20 to 1 is a limiter. In the compressor plugin, you can enable a fixed limiter right in the plugin. This can be useful to limit the signal from going above the specific threshold level so that it doesn't clip. Other types of dynamic processors include de-essers, gates, expanders, multiband compressors, and limiters. De-essers feed an EQ signal that emphasizes the sibilant frequencies into the sidechain of a compressor, which creates a specialized compressor that only compresses these sibilant frequencies. Gates or noise gates are much like compressors, but instead of attenuating the signals that are louder than the threshold, they act in the opposite way. A gate is always closed, so the output is silent, and it only opens when the signal crosses the threshold, making them really useful for removing unwanted noise or for creating effects like the famous gated reverb sound. Expanders work much like compressors, only they expand the signal when it crosses the threshold, making it louder instead of compressing it. Multiband dynamics processors just break the signal into multiple separate frequency bands so that each band can be processed differently from the others.